Hello, and welcome to the midweek episode of Views of an Outsider, The Outsider's View from February 17th. Let's jump straight in with the cultural stories. The Superbowl was last weekend. It opened with a fantastic rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, and Brad Pitt gave an introduction that was actually quite good, so I'm going to play that for you.
Players and coaches, or these teams and sides.
Showing firefighters, Native Americans dancing,
We, all of us,
teachers,
the dreamers, the warriors,
military,
the builders and believers.
It's okay, you're going to be just fine.
nurses,
Brought together to celebrate our greatest game. The game that teaches us what we can achieve when we gather together in that most American of formations. The one most fundamental to every play call and every game. The huddle. Think about it. When we are bound by a common goal,
Orville and Wilbur Wright,
we've reached heights,
military funeral, astronauts,
pushed progress, not alone, but together.
civil rights movement,
In ways that have lifted the world and one another.
Although we need to reinforce here and here.
The huddle is a metaphor for our history, for the power found in our shared purpose. It's in the will to imagine flight.
Kitty Hawk,
Soar skyward. They change the course of human history. And the courage to fight
Marines at Iwo Jima,
the enemy. The toughest fight in the history of America. In the heart to unite and bridge the difference.
the March on Washington with Martin Luther King, NASA,
It's in the audacity.
Apollo 11,
We will go there.
the moon landing,
It's in our collective spirit, not just in the highest times, but in the hardest, in the darkness, and the trouble, and the struggle.
Hurricane Helene caused devastating flooding in Georgia.
Nightmare fire conditions across Los Angeles County. It's there, in our unity, that we form hope and find strength.
9/11, firefighters in the rubble,
Sure, the huddle is just a rough circle, a simple oval, a crowd of 11, or a country
Family
of
dinner.
300 million on the field and across the land. It's the place where we meet, eye to eye,
and building skyscrapers,
shoulder.
paratroopers,
In that space,
veterans returning home from war,
bound by the promise and driven by the pledge to chase the prize.
the flag, the Olympics,
Why?
the Paralympics,
What did we overcome?
suffrage, cowboys,
When did we grow?
first responders,
We rise.
the signing of the Declaration of Independence,
The only way.
Native Americans, civil rights,
At the core of this day, and this glorious, chaotic, exasperating experiment that is us.
stars and stripes,
These players compete, so their teams might prevail. Today, we celebrate the urgency of now,
first responders,
thrill of what's next,
firefighters,
the glory of this game.
prosthetic robotics,
As one.
military,
It's time, America, to huddle up. It's time for the Super Bowl.
the cavalry charging across America with flag flying on Mustangs. American pride, optimism, unity. I think they're starting to get it. The Secret Service also put out an ad that was pretty good, so it's short and I'll play that for you.
America was founded on an idea of freedom.
Showed Abraham Lincoln.
America's always stepped forward
Statue of
in time
Liberty.
of need throughout our short but powerful history.
Ask not what your country can
Shuttle
do for
launch.
you. Ask what you can do for your country. Tear down this wall.
Liberation of Paris.
For all of it.
Fall of the Berlin Wall. Hinckley shooting Reagan.
Second plane hit the tower.
Bush being told about 9/11 in the classroom.
Are humble. They have an inner pride to keep this idea alive.
Secret Service agents.
Protectors are born, they're not made.
The Secret Service agent in front of Trump this summer.
The Secret Service protecting this Super Bowl is asking a few more to step forward.
Air Force One. And it ended with a call, join us. Now that's an inspirational message that will actually appeal to the people who would be interested in serving. Okay, one more commercial. Bud Light, I think, is starting to get it. So they put out a commercial that actually targets their audience.
You wanna go fishing tomorrow? I got a colonoscopy tomorrow.
Fellas, I accidentally threw a lame party.
Okay, Ted. They're on their way.
Block party. Yeah! 80s, baby!
You call this a party?
Huey Lewis.
Cul-de-sac party. Launch.
Power Love.
For an invitation.
Is that our leaf blower?
Party at the sack.
Yeah!
Cordially invited to the end of the cul-de-sac.
This is incredible.
Your mower smokes meat?
Oh, a smoker cuts grass.
Hell yeah.
I spend most of my money on this. Your rig? Fully custom. How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy? As many Bud Lights as it takes. A lot of Bud Lights. This cul-de-sac.
Barbecue.
Bill, get off the boat. The HOA's already breathing down my neck.
Don't take fame. Don't take no credit card to ride this train. Yeah, I think they're starting to get it, people. All right, but there's a party pooper at every party. So Nike had to run their first Super Bowl ad in like decades, and it sucked. Here we go.
You can't be demanding. You can't be relentless. You can't put yourself first. So, put yourself first. You can't be confident. So be confident. You can't challenge. So challenge. You can't dominate. So dominate. You can't flex. So flex. You can't fill a stadium. So fill that stadium. You can't be emotional, so be emotional. You can't take credit. You can't speak up. You can't be so ambitious. You can't break records. You can't have any fun. You can't make demands. You can't keep score. You can't stand out. Whatever you do, you can't win.
What?
So win.
How about try this on for size? You can't be honest, so be honest. No one is saying any of that to women anymore. They haven't said that for decades. No one. I mean, except you to Riley Gaines. Like I said before, the majority of people who tell women what they can't and can't do, and what they're supposed to think, and how they're supposed to act, and what they're supposed to want, and how they're supposed to look, are other women. So how about some honesty for a change? The worst commercial of the whole game was the NFL commercial trying to get everybody to get excited about women's flag football. which sounds even worse than the WNBA. You cannot nag people into watching a sport that nobody cares about. I'm sorry, but you can't. And the commercial was stupid, having a woman play one-on-one tag football, which doesn't make sense because football is a team sport. How do you even play one-on-one football? With a dude, and a completely unrealistic display where he falls down and lays there like a ox that's been hit over the head as she runs circles around him and scores. Okay, if you need to live in fantasy land to feel better, go ahead, but like I said, the rest of us have decided in favor of honesty. Unfortunately, the NFL no longer knows how to put on a halftime show because this one, it sucked. You should have gotten Tom Mack. But you didn't, so here's what you did.
Burn this thing down, don't you get with me, stay with me. Crashing out right now, it ain't sin for me. Did it with integrity. These boys try to hate on me, just wait and see. More what I be spilling, this just came to me. Dangerously, ain't no changing me, ain't no shaming me. Flip a coin, you want the dangerous me?
Trump became the first sitting president to attend the Super Bowl. And while he was there, Trump met with the victims and first responders of the terrorist attack in New Orleans before the game started. And he did the traditional Super Bowl interview that Biden was unable to do because of his cognitive impairment. Okay, so from television to social media, President Trump signed an executive order directing the Commerce and Treasury Department to create a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, which might be used to purchase a stake in Tic Tok. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment portfolio that governments use to purchase various financial assets like stocks, bonds, real estates, precious metals, etc. Sovereign wealth funds have become pretty common in the last few decades. Countries like China, Norway, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, the UAE all have trillions of dollars in assets invested in this way, and several American states, including Alaska, Texas, and New Mexico, have sovereign wealth funds worth tens of billions of dollars. So this could be an answer to the Tic Tok ban. Switching to the dark side of the internet, Kanye posted hardcore porn on X this week before deleting his account. Now, I'm not saying that he should be banned for his subhuman opinions and heinous views, or even for his emasculating behavior out in the real world by displaying his naked wife to other men. Because the first is protected by the freedom of speech, and the second has nothing to do with the social media platform. But posting porn on the platform does involve the platform, and porn is not speech. It's not like they're reciting Shakespeare. It is prostitution, sex in exchange for money, which is illegal. There are porn websites out there. If you want to watch it, go there. There is absolutely no legitimate argument for why porn needs to be everywhere, including on social media platforms, so that the people who don't want to see it do, and even worse, the kids see it. So for that, he should be banned. But I realize he won't be. And a handful of equally sad people who actually admire this guy are clearly as incapable of being objective about this issue as they are of being objective about him. Or they would have been turned off by the things he regularly does a long time ago. So, for my part, this will be the last story that I intend to cover about Kanye, unless something truly beyond his usual sliminess happens, because he's frankly not valuable enough in any way to be worth giving another second of my finite life's attention to. And the world would be a better place if everyone decided to share in that sentiment, but that's up to them. I've made my decision. So, continuing our look at bad people in our culture, here is a clip of a tolerant liberal spreading inclusion and acceptance and advancing unity.
So, America, do your duty, make fascists afraid again. Every day is Punch a Nazi Day.
So you would do that?
Should the opportunity present, with a smile.
Yeah, right.
Nobody plays enough Wolfenstein anymore. We need to make more good Nazis. The good Nazis are the dead ones.
Who would you classify as a Nazi?
Elon Musk, Matt Walsh, Donald Trump, Hegseth, not all of
You would punch Matt Walsh in the face?
Absolutely.
If he walked down here, you would punch him in the face?
Sure.
I love the commitment.
Yeah, no, we've got better to do than put up with this crazy, stupid, fascist. We
I
did
agree.
this 80 years ago. The entire planet told them to f*** off. We had to kill 60 million people to do it. They can go the hell away. We've got better stuff to do.
Okay, considering you're the one talking about assaulting people for no reason, and even murdering people who have literally done nothing to you, except to see the world differently than you do, I'd say that makes you the Nazi. And maybe if you had enough IQ points to allow you to be able to read, then you might discover these wonderful things called books, in which you would find all of the information that would have told you who the Nazis really were and what they actually did, instead of you just repeating a media word like a trained parrot without having any comprehension of what the sounds coming out of your face mean. If only the rest of us were as good a people as all of the bloodthirsty leftists out there who are ready to kill people the instant they can't force their ideas down everyone else's throats like a bunch of totalitarian dictators that they have behaved as for the past 4 years. Ah, the great lovers at democracy at work again. And as always, completely immune to the irony embodied in their positions. And you know what? If you weren't just another blowhard needle in a haystack out there, then people might actually be concerned about your big talk, but we're not. Because we don't take you seriously enough to be afraid of you. You're just the annoying fly buzzing in our ear. We'll shoo you away, forget you ever existed, and go on with our lives. So crawl back into your sad corner with the other video game casualties of Gen X like Destiny, and join him in wallowing in your mutual embarrassment at being completely incapable of making anyone take you seriously, or to have the ability to satisfy a woman enough to make her stay with you without keeping her in a hole in your basement like the creepy guy in Silence of the Lambs. Now, from the crazy old to the new, let's take a look at the new Republican tint. Approval ratings for Trump are at 53%, despite the media's best efforts to convince everyone that the end is near. A CBS poll taken 20 days into the administration shows that for those over the age of 65, his approval rating is 50-50. For those between 45 and 64, the percentage of people that approved of him is 56 plus 12. For those aged 30 to 44, it's 52 plus 4. And among the 18 to 29-year-olds, there is a 55% plus 10 approval rating. Behold the future, leftists. Keep putting the kids down for being out of their league because they decide to grow up and get involved in the world. That's working out real well for you. These polls also showed that 61% of white voters approve, 33% of black voters approve, which is normally close to 10 when it comes to Republican presidents. 49% of Hispanic voters also approve. 70% of all Americans say that they feel that Trump is doing what he promised to do, including 68% of Hispanics and 58% of black people. 59% of Americans approve of Trump's program to find and deport illegal aliens, including the majority of people in every age group. Broken down by race rather than age, 66% of white people approve, 49% of Hispanic people approve, 49% of black people approve, and even 23% of Democrats approve, plus 59% of independents approve of the deportations. Among those between 18 and 29, 79% described Trump as tough, 65 describe him as energetic, 63% describe him as effective, 62% describe him as focused, and 58% describe him as competent. Only 35% describe him as compassionate, understandably, and yet they still approve of him because they find competence more useful than compassion is in a politician. There also seems to be a growing backlash against this overblown, toxic level of compassion that has been forced down the young people's throats. And they seem to be rejecting it as fake and not the end-all be-all, the most important quality in evaluating a person. They want reality and optimism, not coddling and pity. You tried to damage them until you broke them, but in the case of the majority of them, the numbers would indicate that you failed. They've opened their eyes, as all young creatures eventually do, and they see you for the unhealthy, edible mothers that you've become. But that doesn't mean that the new Democrats are going to pull back from the crazy, so let's take a look at the crazy Democrats. The representative of Oregon showed up at an anti-Trump protest where she had this to say.
I've been told I have 30 seconds, so I am going to tell you that we do have to, I don't swear in public very well, but we have to Trump.
I don't think that came out like you meant for it to.
Children that I just did that.
I think you should be more worried about your husband knowing you said that than your children. I mean, doesn't that qualify as sexual harassment in the workplace? Where's Me Too when you actually need them? I'd love to see them have to defend Trump from the inappropriate sexual advances of a lib in Congress in order to avoid being total hypocrites. Anyway, the libs of this protest had a big plan for resisting change, and it was, I kid you not, singing. Sort of.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on? Which side are you on? We'll fight against.
Ouch. Ouch. Ouch! Ouch! Oh my gosh! Oh. That's all I can stomach. As you heard, it was a protest made up of cats who had been stuffed into a bag and were being thrown repeatedly against the wall. And in case you're wondering, yes, that method ended up being every bit as effective at changing something as you would expect it to be. Meaning they changed nothing at all. But I'm more than happy to answer the question that you were howling like a bunch of rabid, wounded animals. We're on the side of anyone who doesn't do that and who instead saves me money. And who, like me, has decided to ignore the crazy people who have no asylum to call home, apparently, instead of putting them in charge of the sane people's lives. The problem with the left is that they have no serious ideas to offer anyone. And performative screeching is sadly the most that they have to offer the world anymore. This wasn't always true, but it's definitely become true. Thankfully, we have a few serious people who are focused on fixing real issues. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, my home state, continued his push to reform FEMA last Tuesday when he introduced a bill to prohibit political discrimination in the distribution of disaster relief. This was released by a copy of the bill first obtained by the Daily Wire. Lankford put forth the Stopping Political Discrimination in Disaster Assistance Act to add political affiliation as a protected class when it comes to emergency relief. This bill comes as FEMA faces criticism over its handling of the recent hurricanes, including an incident in Florida where a supervisor told workers to, quote, avoid homes advertising for Trump. The Oklahoma Republican had introduced similar legislation in November before Republicans officially regained control of the Senate. Now, with the numbers to get it done, he is moving forward once again to ensure that Americans cannot be discriminated against by the government that they fund for having beliefs that differ from those who happen to be in power at the moment. He has also asked the new Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, to commit to prohibiting political discrimination when she was going through her confirmation hearings. All right, leaving the domestic for a moment, let's catch up on foreign affairs. Although it pains me to do this, I have no choice but to call out Australia. Sorry, guys. I've got to do what I've got to do. A pair of Australian nurses went viral this week for using a Zoom call to brag to the world about murdering their Israeli patients. Here's what that sounded like.
Why do you think I'm gonna get killed?
It's Palestine's country, not your country.
What's her name?
One day, your time will come and you will die the most...
We spread
Listen to me.
Peace.
Listen to me.
And you spread
when your time comes...
How are you doctors? Wait.
I want you to remember my face.
Okay. Gotcha.
That you will
I have a
die
question
the most
though.
disgusting death.
All right, for sure. I have a question though. I have a question. Let's say an Israeli. God
I won't
forbid.
treat them. I'll kill them.
You'll kill them? So if an Israeli is in Australia and God forbid something happened to him and he comes to your hospital, would you kill him?
You have no idea how many Israeli Kara dog came to this hospital and...
He sliced the throat. Okay, to be clear, that is a public confession of first-degree murder with a hate crime motivation. So I better hear that both of these jihadis have been arrested and are about to be prosecuted, during which trial they will face the death penalty for crimes against humanity under the Geneva Convention. You extremists make it clear every time you open your disgusting mouths which side is the evil one. On the one hand, Israel treated Sinwar himself for his brain cancer and then released him to boot, while you admit to murdering innocent Israeli civilians who have no say at all in national policy just for being the race that they are. The difference between you and them is glaring, as always, and I'm not even a little bit on your side. Australia seriously needs to step up and reconsider its vetting processes for who it allows to come into its country. And it also needs to start making use of its ability to use deportations to deal with people like this and other unworthy immigrants. This behavior and this mindset both definitely qualify as unworthy by every measurement imaginable, especially when there are actual good people who contribute positively to the world who are waiting in line. Australia should be ashamed of these two people. And you know I'm right about that. Meanwhile, in Israel, 3 emaciated hostages were released by Hamas in exchange for hundreds of terrorists. They had been held for over 440 days, and one of them weighed only 87 pounds. He was also unaware that his wife and children had been murdered by Hamas. And so in the statement he made upon being released, he spoke about how much he was looking forward to seeing them, not knowing that they had been dead for over a year, which is absolutely heartbreaking. Reminiscent of the hostage that was rescued several months ago by the IDF, whose father was found in his apartment having died of a heart attack only hours before the officials arrived to tell him the good news. He died not knowing that his son was safe. Here's what Trump had to say after seeing the video of the released hostages.
I watched the hostages come back today, and they look like Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
They were in horrible condition. They were emaciated. It looked like many years ago, the Holocaust survivors. And I don't know how much longer we can take that. When I watch that, I know we have a deal where we're supposed to get, they dribble in and keep dribbling in, but they are in really bad shape. They have been treated brutally, horribly. Even the ones that came out earlier, they were in a little bit better shape, but mentally they were treated so badly. Who could take that? At some point, we're going to lose our patience. When I see that scene that I saw today with people coming out of helicopters and airplanes that are emaciated, that look like they haven't had a meal in a month, no reason for that. And I don't know how much longer we can take it.
It had clearly been a lot longer than a month since they had last eaten. Facing backlash over the condition of the hostages, Hamas did what Hamas does best. They violated their own deal. They have canceled any further hostage releases, presumably because they too are so emaciated that they cannot be allowed to be seen in this condition, and they want a little time to try to fatten them up at least a little bit. Trump responded by saying that if all of the hostages were not released by noon on Saturday, then Israel has the green light from the United States to rain down hell itself. Here's what that sounded like.
Well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that be because that's Israel's decision, but as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out.
We've run out of patience. After hearing this, Israel decided to echo that threat, giving Hamas until noon on Saturday to release the hostages or face the consequences of Israel resuming full-scale warfare, saying, quote, "The IDF will resume intense fighting until the final defeat of Hamas." We all knew that Hamas was incapable of keeping their word and that it would come to this. So, FAFO. And to Israel, I can only say do what has to be done. They have a choice. It's on them. By the way, USAID provided $230 million in funding for Gaza just during the month of November. 1 month's worth of aid. I would remind everyone that was over a year after they had continued to hold the hostages from October 7th, and you're still giving them hundreds of millions of dollars. And those hostages included Americans. Since October the 7th, the American taxpayer has sent $2.1 billion of our hard-earned money in so-called aid to Gaza, which probably went to buy weapons and to fund lives of luxury for Hamas's leadership in Qatar, if their past record for stealing the people's aid is any indication. This is what the senator from Tennessee had to say about all of this on Face the Nation.
Do you expect Congress to actually authorize the president to dismantle and consolidate USAID?
I think there's a tremendous appetite to do it again, Margaret, because what we want to see is alignment of our programs with America's national security interest. USAID has been out of control. I've demanded accountability from AID. They've refused it. As an appropriator, I've asked them to be very clear about, for example, their role funding Hamas in Gaza. They would not comply. They will not tell us what they do. Now that we start to find out some of the programs that AID has been funding, if you think about it, sex change operations in Guatemala, LGBTQ programs in Serbia.
The U.S. government does not fund sex change operations or fund Hamas. You know that, though.
If you send aid knowing that it will be stolen by Hamas, then you can say it was intended for the Palestinian people, but what you're actually doing is funding Hamas. Mike Walls, the National Security Advisor, had this to add on MSNBC.
Is foreign aid vital to the nation's national security?
When foreign aid is aligned with U.S. objectives and U.S. objectives meet the president's objectives as commander-in-chief, then it is. But that is not the case. Many of these senior aid officials have their own agenda, have gone in their own direction, and these programs, many of which are no longer authorized by Congress, just seem to continue in perpetuity.
Gutting USAID is extremely popular among Americans, according to the polls. In other news, Trump welcomed King Abdullah of Jordan to the White House on Tuesday, and Trump held firm to his plans for the Gaza Strip. Considering that Jordan's queen has been very outspoken in her public virtue signaling on behalf of the Palestinian people, no doubt she is looking forward to welcoming them into her country with open arms, even if it does mean that the first thing they will do is to overthrow her royal position. After all, Jordan is already more than 70% Palestinian, and it is a country that was specifically created for the Palestinian people. So relocating them to their country while the Gaza Strip is rebuilt makes perfect sense. And I'm sure that the Queen is thrilled with these arrangements. She would surely not want to force the Palestinian people, for whom she has expressed so much personal concern, to live in the poverty of rubble and ruins for the next several years once the war finally does come to an end and the rebuilding can start. Trump had this to say.
If you didn't have the October 7th catastrophe, and it was a horrible catastrophe, then probably you wouldn't be talking about that. But the only thing I can say is this is going to bring stability and peace to the Middle East. And ultimately, when it's developed, which will be in quite a while from now, because we want to let things calm down, but when it's developed, it's going to bring tremendous numbers of jobs to the Middle East, including the people of your country.
King Abdullah had to smile and agree.
Mr. President, I truly believe that with all the challenges that we have in the Middle East, that I finally see somebody that can take us across the finish line to bring stability, peace, and prosperity to all of us in the region. And it is, I think, our collective responsibility in the Middle East to continue to work with you, to support you, to achieve those lofty goals. So I'm very delighted to be here. And as you said, sir, we've got some very interesting discussions ahead.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I am so glad you're on board. I know we can count on you to put those words into actions. The Washington Free Beacon put out a wonderful article by the historian Andrew Roberts, who systematically explained that the results of losing a war have often meant mass migration due to the typical resulting loss of territory, which was certainly true after World War I and World War II. And up through the Korean War and beyond. It was true of the Gulf War as well. And in none of those cases did anyone consider those consistent results to be ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing means mass murder, not moving. If you start a war and proceed to lose a war, then you often lose something tangible like life and property. So if you don't want to experience those losses, stop starting wars. People like the Bibas family lost far more important things than their home as a result of the war that was started by the terrorists that you knowingly elected. In happier news, Russia freed the American teacher that they were holding hostage. Mark Fogel has been a prisoner for more than 3 years. Trump not only didn't surrender an arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death in exchange for our hostage, but in fact, it seems right now like he gave them nothing beyond a polite thank you. Fogel kissed the ground when he reached the United States and was invited by Trump to spend the night in the White House and enjoy the Lincoln bedroom. Fogel had this to say through his tears of relief.
I'm a middle-class school teacher who's now in a dream world.
We're going to show you the Lincoln bedroom. It's a very special place. Appropriate for tonight. Very appropriate.
And thank you all. And I love our country. And I'm so happy to be back here. And I wish I could articulate it better.
You've done beautifully. And he's got a great mother. And when I saw the mother at a rally, she said, if you win, will you get my son out? And I promised. She's 95 years old. And I said, we'll get him out. And we got him out pretty quickly.
You know, it's important to pause and celebrate the happy endings in this world. The Biden administration, by comparison, delayed even taking the minor step of labeling Fogel's capture as being wrongly detained. That overly tough stand might have upset Putin. Once again, strength actually does deter these crises that will result if you allow yourself to be taken advantage of. Strength does equal peace. Weakness does equal chaos. Let's move from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. The Wall Street Journal ran a headline in their news section, a section that is to the left of even the New York Times, saying, and I quote, "Car hits crowd in Germany, injuring at least 30 in suspected attack." Yes, I hate it when my car starts up all by itself and attacks me. Damn automobiles. Knew we should never have gotten rid of the horse and buggy. Equine have such a low terrorism rate by comparison. Could you be bigger cowards? The true headline, since you're incapable of doing your job, is 24-year-old radical Afghan refugee who was already known to authorities carries out a terror attack in Germany, making it the latest one in a long string of attacks that have resulted from the reckless and intentionally blind immigration policies of the West, and most especially of Europe. Now that's a headline. Accurate, clear, communicates the story honestly. So you know what, media? You can either do your job or you can be replaced and we'll do it for you. But it is going to get done either way. You despicable pack of dishonest cowards. And speaking of the media's collective failure to do their job and report the news, they have completely failed to cover the radical violence that has been going on in South Africa. They have failed to report that South Africa now has more race-based laws than they did at the height of apartheid.
The mayor of DA in PE is a white man. So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. They feel a terrible pain because you have touched a white man. Not because Mashaba and Soli will not be touched. They will be touched, don't worry. But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
That guy sits in Parliament, the one who is inciting his people to cut the throat of white people. Here is him leading a rally in Johannesburg where he led hundreds of thousands of people in a chant to kill the Boer, which means kill white farmers.
Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the poor. The farmer. Kill the poor. The farmer. Pa. 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 Attention.
The media tried to say that this chant should not be taken literally, that even though they're saying shoot to kill the white farmer, they didn't actually mean that. But this guy said, no, that's exactly what we mean.
Must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal
cry babies. Cry babies.
Yes, you don't want a genocide committee against you. You're a crybaby.
I can't give you a guarantee of the future, especially when things are going the way they are.
Subtext.
South Africa has also become the lapdog of Qatar and Iran. They've been taking money from them to do their dirty work at the ICC. South Africa had an abhorrent past, and if they want to have an abhorrent present, then they will have to fund it themselves, because they have seen the last dime in aid money from me. Take note, people, because this is what equity leads to. When you enable envy, hatred, resentment to turn into revenge, it quickly grows unchecked into excusing atrocities, like what happened to John Cross and his wife, an elderly couple in their 70s who were returning home from church to their farm and were tortured for hours by two black men who shot them repeatedly and poured boiling water over them until they died. Returning to Europe, Trump announced new 25% industry-wide tariffs on steel and aluminum and additional reciprocal tariffs for any that are leveled against the United States. Apparently, the EU has been penalizing U.S. tech companies, and tariffs are most likely Trump's leverage to incentivize changes based off of his past record. In other international news, it appears that much of China's announcement about DeepSeek turned out to be exaggerated or untrue, but they are still our biggest competitor in AI. J.D. Vance had this to say at an AI conference about why Europe is so far behind in the AI arms race.
I couldn't help but think of the conference today. If we choose the wrong approach on other things that could be conceived of as dangerous, things like AI, and choose to hold ourselves back, it will alter not only our GDP or the stock market, but the very future of the project that Lafayette and the American founders set off to create. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that all concerns about safety go out the window, but focus matters. And we must focus now on the opportunity to catch lightning in a bottle, unleash our most brilliant innovators, and use AI to improve the well-being of our nations and their peoples.
Basically, he's warning Europe about the costly consequences of their tendency to be helicopter parents. And to finish up with European news, let's look at Ukraine for a moment. Trump apparently proposed a meeting during a call that he had with Vladimir Putin in order to begin talks about stopping the war in Ukraine. The possibility of Putin coming to Trump, Trump going to Putin, or most likely of all, a meeting in Saudi Arabia where all discussed these possibilities. Trump then spoke with President Zelensky to update him on the progress that was being made and said that any negotiations would be conducted through the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and other state officials. Zelensky indicated that his discussion with Trump centered mostly around improving Ukraine's technological defenses in order to protect them against any future Russian invasions, which we must do. Aid to Ukraine will continue.
Does that mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When would the U.S. stop sending funding? When would the U.S. stop sending funding?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back, and frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go, because we're not going to let the other happen. But President Putin wants to have peace now, and that's good. And he didn't want to have peace with Biden.
Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had this to add.
We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
Trump also had this to say on the subject.
Do you see any future in which Ukraine returns to its pre-2014 borders?
Well, I think Pete said today that that's unlikely, right? It certainly would seem to be unlikely. They took a lot of land, and they fought for that land, and they lost a lot of soldiers. But it would just seem to me, and I'm not making an opinion on it, but I've read a lot on it, and a lot of people think that that's unlikely. Some of it will come back. I think some of it will come back. Yeah, some of that land will come back.
Pete Hegseth also commented on the likelihood of Ukraine joining NATO.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5.
CBS covered the story this way.
Privately, even Biden officials often acknowledge that Ukraine would ultimately have to give up some territory in order to secure a deal to end the war, though those Biden officials usually avoided saying that out loud. Trump officials say they're just being realistic 3 years into this invasion in order to drive both sides to the bargaining table. Now, there are many...
Before I play the last clip, I should point out that, like Reagan, who was insanely optimistic enough to push for what amounted to complete nuclear disarmament with Mikhail Gorbachev and Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986, he was also pragmatic enough to not leave us completely defenseless by agreeing to Gorbachev's demand that we end the Star Wars program. Even though the negotiations were almost concluded, Reagan infamously walked away from the table over that point. President Trump, likewise, likes to talk about a lot of idealistic ideas, and he's more than willing to flatter people that he's about to negotiate with. But the deals that he strikes in the end and the policies that he implements historically have been anything but doormat deals. So keep that in mind while listening to what he had to say here.
You know, when I left, we had no Middle East problem. We had no Russia going into Ukraine. They never would have done it. Putin never would have done it. And I came back and we got like the whole world is blowing up. So when we straighten it all out, then I want to have one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
Okay.
If I had to guess, I would say that that is a carrot that is being dangled in order to bring people to the table. And based off of his record, I think that Trump knows that a deal like that would never be struck in good faith between either China or Russia. He'd have to be a fool not to know that. And say what you like, but you don't make a career out of striking business deals by being a fool. My take is that this is a negotiation strategy in order to get a good deal, just like the tariff wars were a strategy used to get concessions from Mexico and Canada. Pete Hegseth, on the other hand, is urging NATO to increase their defense spending.
Leaders of our European allies should take primary responsibility for defense of the continent, which means security ownership by all allies, guided by a clear understanding of strategic realities, and it is an imperative given the strategic realities that we face. And that begins with increasing defense spending. 2% is a start, as President Trump has said, but it's not enough. Nor is 3%, nor is 4%, more like 5%. Real investment, real urgency.
The Secretary General of NATO agreed that this increased spending for defense was necessary.
Last night we discussed a lot of things. Obviously defense spending. Clearly we have to do more. We have to ramp up defense spending because we know we cannot protect ourselves 4 or 5 years from now if we don't. And also we need to ramp up defense spending because it is clear that US rightly requires us to do more. Here on the European side and the Canadian side of NATO. It's only fair, it's only sensible.
And speaking of the military, Pete Hegseth issued an immediate pause on gender-affirming medical procedures for active duty service members. He also ordered an immediate pause for any new promotions in the military for individuals with a history of gender dysphoria. As we went into a bit last week, depression, obesity, and criminality already are not allowed as being compatible with military life. Anything that inhibits you physically, mentally, or morally puts other service members at risk, and they are already risking so much that we have no right to ask them for more or to increase the odds, even a little bit, of even one of them coming home in a flag-draped box. The memo acknowledged that service members with gender dysphoria desire to serve their country and would be treated with respect, a sentiment that I echo. But the military is a living group organism, the health of which, as a whole, has to be put above any one individual. I would say the same thing about someone with any other type of body dysmorphia, like anorexia, who would be physically weakened by that condition, or someone who wants to cut off a healthy arm because they identify as disabled and are therefore not mentally stable when it comes to their judgment. I would also say the same thing about people like me, who have physical disabilities. I have no right to demand that I be made to feel better about myself by forcing the military to take me when I cannot defend the soldier on my right and he might die as a result of my getting my way. A so-called human rights group has filed a lawsuit on the grounds of claiming that this is discrimination, which it is not. Gender dysphoria is no longer being made an exception to the rule regarding other mental health issues that are already grounds for not being considered fit for military service. For it to be discriminatory, you would have to prove that those restrictions on other mental health conditions are reasonable, but there was something different about gender dysphoria as a mental health condition and make a case for why it should be an exception. Hegseth also made the move to restore Fort Liberty to its original name of Fort Bragg. Well, Biden, sorry, old man, you lose. However, Fort Bragg is not being renamed after the original Confederate soldier Braxton Bragg. It is now named after Roland L. Bragg, a Purple Heart and Silver Star recipient who fought in World War II and was a hero of the Battle of the Bulge. I think this is a wonderful compromise. Meanwhile, American students on a military base in Germany walked out of their middle school classes in protest of a visit from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, specifically because of Hegseth's opposition to DEI in the military. The protest lasted an hour. So, basically, a few kids cut class. We used to do that too, but in my day we didn't put on airs about it and try to pretend that we were doing something virtuous. A small group of adults dressed in civilian clothing gathered nearby to boo and to chant, DEI! And the results are, everyone ignored them and nothing has changed. It's a party, but you cry if you want to, cry if you want to, cry if you want to. No one cares enough to cry with you. Boop, boop, bida. Continuing down the drug-addled vein of DEI, according to Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs is abandoning its DEI initiatives in order to get serious and focus on the things that actually matter. Abandoning rules that the only companies that could go public were ones with a board that consisted of at least 2 minorities and 1 woman. Now, if your company is successful because your product is good and no discrimination is taking place, the regulators are going to quit micromanaging everyone and everything and just let people conduct business. We are no longer going to be the kind of people who deliberately tie one hand behind the back of our economy by focusing on other things besides the problem at hand, which you can be sure is definitely what our competition is doing. We are going to keep our eye on the ball from now on and prosper. Disney has also made its first moves to walk away from its massive DEI efforts. Like the saying goes, they went woke and they went broke. They will now focus more on, quote, business outcomes. And they're going to get rid of those annoying 2020 content disclaimers for all of their classic material that tell us that Aladdin portrays Arab stereotypes and Ursula's purple skin is somehow racist. Disney announced that they would replace their DEI performance priorities with talent evaluation strategies. PBS also closed its DEI offices, which is only right because it is a public broadcasting channel funded by us. Jasmine Crockett is still looking to be included at the squad table, and she had this to say to try to impress the cool kids.
I do believe that fear is truly warranted in the sense that people of color are just going to be rounded up. I mean, we've lived it, especially as black folks in this country, right? Like, it's the racial profiling. And so whether you're a U.S. citizen, whether you are here as a DACA recipient, whether you are undocumented, whether you are naturalized, whatever your situation is, I think that if you can be mistaken for being a brown person, that you should be concerned because there is nothing that is tatted on anybody's head that says I'm undocumented or I'm a citizen, right?
And you have the nerve to mouth off about white tears? Pot, meat kettle. And when it comes to no one has tattoos on their head, meaning that everyone could be mistaken for an illegal immigrant, there's these little things called ID and social security numbers. Everyone has them. Oh, those! Could you be more useless and dismissible if that was your goal? Because I doubt it. Tell you what, I'll take you seriously when you demonstrate that you should be taken seriously. Until then, I'm going to treat you exactly as you deserve, as laughably mockable. The board for the Daughters of the American Revolution rejected a proposal to keep trans-identifying men out of their organization. Whatever. Ayanna Pressley, hey, she's still here. Been a while. Reintroduced H.R. 40, which is federal legislation that calls for a study on reparations for slavery in a desperate attempt to make a countermove against Trump's rollbacks of DEI. The bill has 130 co-sponsors, but it is not likely to advance through the Republican-held Congress. And the White House has already opposed reparation efforts. So the best you have is an empty, showy stunt, as usual. The fact that Ayanna knows that this bill is rightly doomed to failure and has submitted it anyway makes it perfectly clear that this is all symbolic, even for her. But since the remaining Democrats are unfortunately completely opposed to anything real or useful, meaningless symbolism is all they have left. And as such, they will go on using it, even though it only reinforces the fast cementing stereotype that the left is no longer a party to be taken seriously.
We can legislate justice.
Amen.
We can legislate healing. And we're certainly long overdue. And for those that would say we need to just get over it, that's interesting. When as a nation you are benefiting right now from an economy that was built on the brutalized backs and the indignities and the horrors of chattel slavery and our African ancestors.
Okay, I hate to break it to you, honey, but that's not true. The South used slave labor, and it fell behind the industrialized North economically. Cotton was only 6% of our GDP in the pre-Civil War era, and less than 10% of our pre-Civil War economy had anything to do with slavery at all. Slavery was an evil that actually held everyone back. It didn't build the country. On the contrary, our economy grew rapidly after slave labor ended and we recovered from the war. And to top it all off, you, Ayanna, were never a slave. And I never owned any slaves. Neither did my family. Can your family say the same thing, Miss Presley? Is it possible that they were among the many slave owners in Africa who kidnapped other Africans and enslaved them themselves, and then eventually sold them to European slave traders when they were done with them? Can you prove that they weren't? How do we know that your family wasn't one of the black slave owners here in the United States, like many black people were, even people who had been former slaves themselves and yet did it to others and their own people to boot? Maybe you should be paying reparations instead of receiving them. You know, it's actually pathetic that your life is so problem-free and cushy as a congresswoman that you have to go back 8 generations to steal a claim of suffering from actual victims and appropriate their mistreatment as your own in order to find an excuse for a congressperson to get more money by picking the pocket of people like me living below the poverty line. As though you and dirty politicians like you haven't been exposed for doing more than enough of that recently. No one has ever bought this argument, and no one ever will, so keep it up, Karen. Speaking of changes to the type of people who hold power, Tulsi Gabbard has been confirmed as the head of intelligence in a 52-48 vote. Kash Patel is still likely to be confirmed as the head of the FBI, and the Senate voted 53-47 to end debates on RFK Jr.'s nomination, and he is now confirmed. Let some serious and rigorous scientific studies begin. Lord knows we've been paying through the nose for all of the junk science in recent years. Speaking of which, surprise! Excessive waste has already been discovered at CMS.
The subcommittee headed by Chairman Marcia Taylor Greene, her and her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that DOGE is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us, unfortunately. I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that DOGE is working on every single day.
Whoa. Did you just say $2.7 trillion? As in 8% of our entire national debt went to fraudulent payments to dead people? The chief equity officer of HHS, someone named Dia Harris, is one of countless government employees who has changed their job title in an attempt to avoid being fired in the wake of Trump's declaration that ended DEI in the federal government. Dia identifies as, and I quote from his professional page, an unapologetically blackety black man who uses the pronouns he, him, and ill. Okay. He's now trying to hide behind the title of Chief Organizational Development Officer, and he has proceeded to falsify his entire resume by altering all of his previous job titles, which are all DEI related, since his entire career has been spent as a DEI consultant and advocate. We see you. Here is a clip of RFK being sworn into office.
I, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Do solemnly swear. Do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend. That I will support and defend. The Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely. That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation. Without any mental reservation. Or purpose of evasion. Or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully discharge. And that I will well and faithfully discharge. The duties of the office. The duties of the office. On which I am about to enter. On which I'm about to enter. So help me God. So help me God. Congratulations.
This is a great day for Maha. Bobby had this to say.
For 20 years, I've gotten up every morning on my knees and prayed that God would put me in a position where I can end the childhood chronic disease epidemic in this country. On August 23rd of last year, God sent me President Trump. And he gave me he's now given me, he's kept every promise that he's made to me. He's kept his word in every account and gone way beyond it. I'm so grateful to you, Mr. President. A lot of people told me that I couldn't trust President Trump, that I better get it in writing. And we did a handshake, and everything that he told me he was going to do, he has done. And I'm so grateful to him, and I've told you before, I genuinely believe that you are a pivotal historical figure, and you are going to transform this country.
RFK also plans to focus heavily on preventative care and purging the unhealthy accumulation of rot at the NIH, which is now going to be headed by Jay Bhattacharya. Kennedy also plans to implement some new regulations when it comes to food safety. Meanwhile, the Daily Wire learned that a left-wing organization is set to receive more than $22 million from the United States government for a campaign that encouraged illegal aliens to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Nearly $19 million of the $22.4 million grant from the Department of Health and Human Services has already been paid out to support the left-wing nonprofits' efforts to expand vaccines with focus on vulnerable populations within the Latino community, including illegal aliens. So I'm now paying for your vaccines when you're here illegally so that pharma can profit. You know, if Bobby can't put a stop to this wasteful spending, then hopefully Doge will when they get to them. Let's pivot from healthcare to education. A California teacher who had previously been awarded Teacher of the Year in San Diego County sobbed in court as she admitted to sexually abusing two students ages 11 and 12 Jacqueline Ma, who formerly taught at Leakin Acres Elementary School in National City, was arrested in the spring of 2023 after the mother of a 12-year-old boy alerted authorities about Ma's explicit texts to her son. She had initially faced up to 180 years in prison for her crimes, but entered a plea bargain for lesser charges and is now facing a likely 30-year to life sentence. Speaking of things that need drastic changing in the education system, where sexual abuse in one form or another affects a staggering number of children, Trump repeated his vow to shut down the Department of Education.
How soon do you want the Department of Education to be closed?
Oh, I'd like it to be closed immediately. Look, the Department of Education's a big con job. We're ranked, so they rank the top 40 countries in the world. We're ranked number 40th. But we're ranked number 1 in one department, cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world, but we're ranked number 40. We've been between 38 and 40. The last time I looked, it was 38, and then I looked 2 days ago, it came out the new list. It came out at number 40, so we're ranked 40.
If you do a bad job and get bad results out here in the real world, you are replaced with someone who can do better. And no one can deny that the Department of Education has done a bad job, not even the DOE when it assesses itself. When it comes to the DOE funding waste, in the fiscal year 2024, the DOE spent $268 billion, which was a 370% increase in spending since 1980, and that's double the rate that the rest of the government has grown during that time period. One of the biggest failures out of all of our government departments, growing at twice the rate of everyone else and being allowed to hoover up more money despite their failure. $165 billion was spent on higher education. So half of its total spending was used to churn out Hamas groupies that barred Jews from classrooms and erected a bunch of stupid tentifadas. Most of that went to grants to pay for degrees in fields that have no value on the job market. Only $40 billion, less than 1/6 of the money, went to elementary and secondary school students. So all of that money is not going to the kiddies. It's going to the overgrown kiddos on liberal campuses who have been wasting it on nonsense that only makes our culture worse and our society more divided. $68.1 billion went to indirect spending and block grants that are given to states for teachers' unions, etc. Biden had requested $100 million in order to develop and implement strategies for promoting diversity in school and creating more equity. $1 billion worth of DEI grants, 221 of them to be exact, has been handed out by the Department of Education just since 2021. That includes $490 million in grants for race-based hiring practices, which are constitutionally illegal under the Civil Rights Act, and another $169 million for DEI-based mental health training. An additional $343 million was spent on other general DEI programs. After the Supreme Court ended affirmative action, the Department of Education released a bunch of their resources to colleges and universities in an attempt to get around the law. On August 14th, 2023, Joe Biden issued a Dear Colleagues letter, which is an advisory letter from the federal government to various institutions, directing them on how to apply the law. This letter utilized language tricks, such as substituting overcoming adversity for implementing racial quotas. They encouraged the use of additional tricks, like instead of asking a question about your race, On your college application and adjusting the chances of being admitted accordingly, they ask you to write an essay about how you have overcome adversity in which your race will likely be made clear. The Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Education Department, Catherine Lamon, bragged that even after the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action, college campuses were implementing new practices that still allowed them to lawfully engineer and graduate diverse student bodies. She basically instructed colleges to ignore the Supreme Court. The DOE's priority is clearly not students. That was seen during COVID when the American Federation of Teachers was pushing for students to remain out of school indefinitely, despite the damage being done to them both psychologically and educationally, and despite the fact that COVID was about as fatal to children as the common cold is. Randy Weingarten, president of the AFT, led those efforts, and now she's caterwauling because the jig is up and change is a-comin'.
What we're hearing is just complete chaos and, frankly, a whole bunch of cruelty. Because at the end of the day, you can make departments more efficient, and I'm not a big believer in bureaucracy, but this feels like, as Elon Musk said to you, evisceration. So here's a guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts from these departments, and he's not touching them, but what he's doing is really taking money from kids who really need it in the field.
The federal government has contracts with SpaceX, which is the most successful private space company on Earth, and they're relying on them to rescue the astronauts that they got stranded at the International Space Station. They're not giving him billions of dollars to indoctrinate children with DEI materials and gender ideology. That would be you, Randy. Former Biden Educator Secretary Miguel Cardona had this to say.
When we talk about those cuts, what we're talking about is programming for students or following research that we know improves outcomes for students. I'm all in favor of reviewing what works best, and I'm even in favor of assessing policy, whether you agree with it or not. But I'm not in favor of the change that's happening, which is going from democracy to a monarchy. And we're seeing examples of that in every agency, and it's really troubling. And I think the American people, regardless of party, should be worried about what's happening.
I don't think so. So it's democracy and not a monarchy when you funnel my money into your political agendas without the consent of the people. But it's doing away with democracy and replacing it with monarchy when the people elect someone specifically because he promised to put a stop to that waste, and then he keeps the promise he made to the people. I gotta admit, I don't see it. And yeah, I'm sure you're all for some useless investigation that you can delay until everyone forgets about what's going on so that nothing changes. You're like the husband whose wife has been telling him for years that she's going to leave him, and now that she has actually filed for divorce, he's suddenly ready to go to marriage counseling. But in both situations, it's too late now. You should have thought of all of that a long time ago and been willing to assess and compromise from day one. Now it's too late for talking. We've moved on to decisive action. The View, as ever, jabbered but had nothing worth hearing to say.
It's not really about saving money.
No.
I think there's a much more nefarious reason for it. I think it's because without education, you get cheaper labor. Yeah. I think what they want to do is create in the United States a permanent underclass, a permanent cheap workforce, because educated workers cost more. That is the bottom line, and that's what they're doing. Okay.
No. We want national school choice so that parents can make sure that their children receive a good education regardless of their school district. Ineffective school districts can be left empty and allowed to die instead of you spending my money to subsidize them and keep them afloat by allowing them to hold children in poor neighborhoods hostage and sentence them to unsuccessful futures. You're the one fighting to preserve that system. The USA spends the most dollars per student of any country in the world, And we have fallen to last place on the charts in terms of the results we get in exchange. Number 1 spender. Number 40 in results of quality education. You're the one who wants to preserve that status quo. It's time to cut the rope to the drags on the system. You, who are holding our young people of all races back from what they are capable of. Besides, aren't you the one who's pro-illegal immigration? You talk about wanting a cheap labor force to be a permanent working class. According to Chris Rufo, senior fellow of the Manhattan Institute, the DOE is funding the following. $52 million to equity assistance centers at the Department of Education, which were founded in the 60s in order to provide colorblind education for all, which was good. But now they've been hijacked, forcing schools in all 50 states as their official advisors to promote critical race theory that is so extreme that they have even made the argument that white babies are already racist before they even start talking. They are racist by the age of 3 months, these groups claim. They also promote other organizations designed to breed resentful hatred, like BLM, and they even describe schools as concentration camps. This is an example of how radical and unhinged the people at these equity assistance centers actually are.
We are working in a structurally racist from its beginning system. It's like sometimes I feel like I'm working in this concentration camp and there's the gas chambers everywhere and I'm part of that system. How dare you? And so you have to make that decision about how far you're willing to push or whether you need to get out and do something different.
Insulting Holocaust victims.
Recognize, one, that the system is designed, the public education system is designed to harm black and brown children. It is not designed in their best interest. It never has been. And look, I benefited from public education. I get that. I'm the exception, not the rule.
We are really heavily focused on how do we get police out of schools. We also heavily focus on how do we defund policing and SROs and all that.
Ibrahim Kendi has done a great job of putting words to this idea that a lot of us have known for a long time, that there is no not racist. There is no non-racist. You're either contributing to racism or you're pushing against racism.
Each of these equity centers received an $8 million grant from the Biden-Harris administration, which they used to support dozens of race activists and gender activists. They were then put in charge of advising thousands of public school districts as they harvested tax money to fund their Marxist indoctrination. DOJ is currently going through these contracts in the Department of Education, looking at which ones should be terminated. The people in the clip that I just played for you have all had their federal funding revoked from here on out. Here is more of these activists arguing that sex work is an important part of the LGBTQ community, and therefore children need to be educated about sex work so that they will come to see sex work as legitimate, and LGBTQ sex workers will no longer be stigmatized.
So our third point that we do bring up and cover in this mini presentation is understanding the importance of sex work in the LGBT plus community and in LGBT youth survival, because especially for queer and trans people of color and most emphatically Black trans women, this often is a means of income, and by not talking about it and avoiding talking about that, we're actually making that worse. And making it easier for people to be stigmatized who need support. So we want to make sure that that's something, as educators, that we're aware of, so that we're able to support our communities.
So you are officially campaigning to destigmatize prostitution for Black transgender children, rather than helping them to be healthy and happy enough to never get involved in that life to begin with. That's our education system at work. And I'm paying for you to be able to spread this garbage to children. I think I'm beginning to see the problem. And it's you. There's a word for people like you. Today, we call you groomers. In my day, we called you pedophiles, and that's more appropriate, so I'm going to go with that. Here are more of these activists explaining the importance of fighting adultism, which is a word that they made up to describe adults who believe that adults should make the adult decisions that children are not capable of making for themselves with their inexperience and undeveloped brains. They argue that acknowledging this fundamental reality that adults should make the final decision for children is a form of discrimination.
As service providers and as educators, we want to make sure that we are not reinforcing systems of adultism. For LGBT young people, adultism is uniquely important because a huge part of where adultism meets homophobia and transphobia is the notion that as a young LGBT person, you are not in charge of yourself, you are not in charge of your body, you're not in charge of your medical care. And by denying or trying to control LGBT young people's ability to express themselves as who they truly are, this often leads to things like people running away from home, as we've discussed and shared with you about our personal lives. This often leads to homelessness. This often leads to and creates a lot of the systems that we all here, I would imagine, are trying to prevent. Say, for example, an LGBT child comes out to their parent, and their parent is cishet, and their parent's like, oh, it could just be a phase, you might grow out of it, right? That's something that is commonly heard by LGBT young people. That is not just homophobic and transphobic, it's also adultist, because you're presuming due to that young person's age that they are incapable of recognizing themselves as an LGBT person. So we want to make sure, obviously, as parents, that we're, one, not doing and saying things like that. Not helpful. It's also violent, which we'll get into in a couple slides. But we also want to make sure, as educators, that we are authentically collaborating with our youth and our young people. So we want to make sure that when we're working with young people, especially LGBT youth, we're collaborating with them authentically. We're asking our young people, well, what do you need? What do you think? What is your perspective? We want to make sure our young people are empowered in acknowledging that they are knowledgeable and, yes, wise people, okay, who are able of making decisions, yes, with support, yes, with love, yes, with guidance, but of making decisions about who they are and what that looks like for them.
Okay, first, I would have you take note of the part where she said, so we want to make sure that we as parents don't do what those other parents are doing. You are not these children's parents. You are teachers. That's what is called a Freudian slip, and it's a big part of the problem here. And as for the rest of what you said, no, sweetie. Telling a child that they could outgrow something is science. Studies show that between 80 and 90% of adolescents going through gender dysphoria will outgrow it by the age of 19 and go on to lead full and happy lives if left to their own devices, thus sparing them painful and radical experimental surgeries that will rob them of their chance to ever become parents themselves and of most of their normal sexual function. And no, your job as an educator is not to collaborate with children and come between them and their parents. Your job is to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science. We're done. Anything else is abuse and should be a fireable offense. This philosophy is Soviet Union level Marxism 101 that believes that the state teachers are the true parents of the children, as she said, not the parents. We'll see about that. Communist China also tried the same tactic when it came to radicalizing their young people and committing acts of brutal violence against their parents and the older generation. In this clip, these destructive pseudo-educators make the case that a 3-month-old infant is actually an evil racist already in their little wee hearts.
So this timeline provides an illustration of how racial awareness develops. According to research, 3-month-olds show a preference for looking at faces that are similar to the race they see most often. At 9 months, infants are unable to distinguish the facial features of racial groups other than their caregiver unless they frequently see images of racially diverse people. By the age of 2, children are putting people into categories based on race, and they are observing and internalizing power dynamics. At age 3, children develop biases and begin assigning meaning to race by attributing positive traits to the dominant race. However, children can still respond to positive messaging about their own and others' racial identities. By age 5, children of all races demonstrate social biases primarily by attributing negative traits to non-white races. At this age, children are capable of acting against racial injustice.
Yep, the babies are all racist. Correction. The white babies are all racist. The black babies, who also prefer their own family members, are totally fine. But the white babies all need to be kidnapped and raised by these crazy people. You know, I don't really think that there's an infant branch of the Klan out there. You know, little babies on their rocking horses in white hoods. Once again, this is basic Marxism, that family structures are inherently unhealthy because they cause people within those family structures, including children, to prefer and value their family above non-family members, which is not equal. The USSR made this very argument. By the way, the research she cites is not actual research, if you didn't already recognize that. It is just pseudo-theorizing. It doesn't come anywhere close to using the scientific method to build a case. It's just dogmatic religious manifestos, not research or science, and they can't disguise that beneath their incestuously appointed experts who all cite each other as their source. These people are a perfect example of what happens when you allow human beings to be indoctrinated over a lifetime with these harmful ideas until they actually believe them and their brains turn to mush. They can believe whatever they want to and spend every day of their lives having struggle sessions in their echo chambers if they so choose. That is their right. But it is time to stop leaving our children to the mercy of these Marxist lunatics.
And I have two white children, two white daughters. They are 7 and 9. And when I think about that question that you asked, what does it mean that's different? I think about how I'm really trying to force my children to reside in reality. So that means that they are going to really push through all of the white fantasy that is just part of what it means to grow up in a white supremacist society. As gets talked about quite a lot, is that whites have a lot of fantasy about what it means to be white and how maybe they deserve everything that they've gotten. There's a lack of history. Their children are very innocent, and that innocence follows them throughout their lives through schooling and in every single institution, whereas children of color are, even in some cases, as Ferguson studied, are adultified at very young ages, not even seen as children, as innocents that deserve loving correction or the same nurturing. And so when I think about how to interrupt that with my own children, it comes up in many different ways. One of the things I think that white parents need to not be afraid to do, and which I know that they are, is to actually name racism as a power dynamic between white people and people of color.
Yes, we don't want children to be innocent or to have fantasies. We want to interrupt that and force them to live in reality. I feel incredibly sorry for your children, and it sounds like you are browbeating them and emotionally abusing them in a relentless, nagging fashion that has become typical of extremists like you, which is all the more reason why you shouldn't be allowed anywhere near anyone else's children. Gut it, Elon. And President Trump, please give the power back to the states and demolish these centers and salt the DOE's ground. Randy Weingarten is threatening to sue to keep the waste going.
The irony here is at the same exact time as Elon Musk and his coders have information across basically that affects all Americans, he refuses to disclose his interests as someone who is a government contractor who gets probably millions, if not billions of dollars in his own companies in terms of all of this. So, number one is to try to stop the data breach. That's number one. And number two is to try actually get Congress to do the kind of accountability on all of this. But that's why we're going to the courts, to try to get the courts to interpret the law and stop this invasion of privacy.
Okay, Randy. Explain to me how it's an invasion of privacy for Elon to look at information and stop the spending. But it's not an invasion of privacy for an unelected bureaucrat to look at my private information in order to keep spending my money. And considering that you campaigned for teachers to have the right to interfere in families and transition children behind their parents' backs without their knowledge, I really don't believe that you care all that much about overstepping individual rights and respecting boundaries like privacy. Representative Garcia had this to add.
Now, I find it ironic, of course, that our chairwoman, Congresswoman Green, is in charge of running this committee. Now, in the last Congress, Chairwoman Green literally showed a pic in our oversight congressional hearing, so I thought I'd bring one as well. Now, this, of course,
it's a picture of Elon Musk in a tuxedo.
Is President Elon Musk. He's also the world's richest man. He was the biggest political donor in the last election. He has billions of dollars in conflicts of interest.
So your big argument is that you personally think that Elon is a dick and secretly he's the president. That's the best you got? Somehow I'm not persuaded by the overwhelming evidence of that deeply profound argument.
Elon Musk and his co-president Donald Trump have spent the first 3 weeks of their presidency attempting a full assault on the separated powers of the Constitution.
He seems to be acting as Trump's co-commander-in-chief. And Elon Musk is acting like a co-president. Trump's billionaire co-president.
He's operating as a co-president, and he was elected by no one.
Elon Musk, as his co-president, fielding questions alongside him in the Oval Office.
It was striking to see Musk standing, the attention of the room seemingly oriented around him.
That's your only hope? The mistaken belief that you can inflame Trump's ego and make him jealous of Elon so they'll fire him? You're failing. No one is taking you seriously, nor should they if these kind of childish attempts is your big controversial plan to resist.
Does Elon Musk have power of the presidency?
Absolutely not.
Right.
That's a ridiculous question.
I asked that question because, the Democrats have been hurling insults at Elon Musk, hurling attacks, calling him President Musk. Most recently, Jamie Raskin, the congressman, took it a step further, calling for Musk's impeachment, saying that he somehow usurped the power of the presidency. What's your response?
It's utterly ridiculous. Elon Musk addressed this in the Oval Office yesterday. The president addressed it as well. Elon Musk is serving at the pleasure of the president, just like everybody else on this team. He takes directives directly from the president of the United States.
Now let's move on to immigration. ICE has arrested 11,000 illegals in just the first 18 days of the new administration. More small-scale anti-deportation protests occurred this week, and I thought some of those people might want to know exactly who they're sticking up for. These people were all arrested on the same day. Just a random sampling. There was a Nigerian man in Atlanta who is a convicted money launderer. San Antonio arrested a man from Mexico who is a convicted assaulter. A man from Honduras was arrested in Washington with convictions for hit and run and DUI. A man from Mexico was arrested in Denver with convictions for aggravated assault. Another man from Mexico was arrested in Houston with convictions for aggravated assault. The day before that, in San Diego, a man with convictions for willful cruelty to a child was arrested. A Guatemalan man was arrested in New York, and he's a rapist. A man from Mexico was arrested in Miami, and he's a meth addict. A man from Honduras was arrested in Newark, and he likes to commit sex offenses against children, for which he has several convictions. A man from Mexico was arrested in New Orleans with an assault conviction. The day before that, a man from Ghana was arrested in Buffalo. He's a convicted murderer, for which he only got 5 years. Another man from Mexico was arrested in Chicago. He's a murderer. Yeah, I'm not on your side. And your tears aren't going to manipulate me into changing that. You know why? Because I care about their tears more than yours. This is what the angel moms, people who have lost their children to illegal immigrant crime, had to say to Selena Gomez's performative sob video.
What about our children who were brutally murdered and raped and beat to death?
Just want to say that I'm so sorry. Only people are getting back. Children.
Seeing that video, it's hard to believe that it's actually genuine and real because she's an actress.
You don't know who you're crying for. What about our children who were brutally murdered and raped and beat to death and left on the floor by these illegal immigrants? I just feel like it's a ruse to deceive people and to garner sympathy for lawlessness.
I wish I could do something, but I can't.
My daughter was a child. There's many other children whose lives were taken due to people who crossed here illegally.
They didn't cry for our daughters. No one has stood up except for us mothers to cry out about our children. I am so happy that Trump won. I am so glad that this is one of the first bills to help with immigration.
It's only been 2 weeks, if that, since he's been in office, and he's taking accountability and he's making moves and he's making things happen.
President Trump genuinely cares for the American people. He cares for the American family.
I truly appreciate everything Donald Trump has done.
We stand with President Trump in making America safe again.
Like I said, I care more about their feelings than your performative empathy for people you don't even know. The DOJ announced a lawsuit against the sanctuary city of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul, and State Attorney General Letitia James. The new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, had this to say.
We're here today because we have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder, who is with DMV. This is a new DOJ, and we are taking steps to protect Americans, American citizens, and angel moms, like the mom standing right behind me, who you're going to hear from in a moment. New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today.
Illinois has already been sued as well. The New York lawsuit specifically targets the green light law, which grants driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, bars inquiries into immigration status, and prevents the DMV from sharing the information that they have on immigration status with federal law enforcement. The order makes it clear that a state is free to stand aside and to not participate or assist in deportations, but it is not free to get in the way. Other Democrat cities are not taking the warning and are brainstorming ineffective ways to resist the highly popular deportation efforts. Kristi Noem added that she was clawing back the full payment that FEMA activists unilaterally gave to New York City's immigrant hotels. FEMA was funding the Roosevelt Hotel. They was housing gang members, including Laken Riley's killer. Quote, "Mark my words, there will not be a single penny spent that goes against the interest and safety of the American people." Pope Francis wrote an open letter in which he criticized America's new immigration policy, citing the Exodus story, where the Jewish slaves fled slavery in Egypt and reclaimed their own ancient homeland through a war. So I'm not really sure what he's suggesting. Mr. Pope, are you saying that illegal migrants should start a war here in America and take our country from us? Or that they should go back to their homelands and start a war to reclaim their own land? He also compared the illegal immigrants to Jesus, who was never an illegal immigrant to anywhere. He lived and died in the country he was born in. In fact, he instructed those who listened to his teachings to obey the laws of the land and render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. So I literally could not care less about what the Pope, who is a religious leader on the other side of the world, personally thinks about immigration in my country, especially considering that I obviously know more about what the Bible says than he does. Which is indeed a very sad, sad statement about the state of the Catholic Church. Perhaps the Pope would like to begin selling off the extreme wealth of Vatican City in order to alleviate the poverty of these illegal immigrants and allow them to legally migrate to other countries by funding the process for them personally? Or perhaps he would like to tear down the very large wall that currently surrounds his wealth and welcome the immigrants of the world into his home. You know, replace St. Peter's Basilica with some rent-controlled affordable housing apartments? No. You haven't even gotten rid of the laws on your own books where you stringently criminally prosecute trespassers on Vatican property. So you don't have a lot of credibility when you pretend to take the moral high ground and tell me that I don't have the same rights that you do when it comes to my home and property. That is exactly the kind of hypocrisy that Jesus called the Pharisees out for. And you might actually know that if you had ever read the Bible for yourself, Mr. Pope. So, maybe you should start with the passage where Jesus instructs people to take the plank out of their own eye before attempting to take the speck of dust out of someone else's eye, with all due respect. Speaking of crimes that should be justly punished with appropriate consequences, as instructed by God in the Bible, a 13-year-old boy was arrested in Detroit for a string of home invasions, including robbery, assault, and attempted rapes. Yes, plural. Where the bleep are his parents for him to be this screwed up by 13? Yes, in rare circumstances, some parents can do everything right and their kid still turns out bad. But that is the exception, not the rule. And even accepting the fact that there are exceptions out there, this is not one of them. There is just no way that you have done everything right as a parent, including putting in the effort that you should have to control your child, yet you have a kid that is this violent, running the streets at night, trying to rape 9-year-old little girls at knife point before he's even 10 years old. If he is this way by 13, you did not do your jobs as parents.
Confessing to the crimes linked to at least 11 break-ins and assaults across the two cities. This mother tells Local 4 Friday she's relieved, but still cannot believe he's only 13. The teen is accused of breaking into her home on Anderson Street earlier this week and attacking her 10-year-old with a knife.
And so I go towards my hallway and I see a guy just shoot out from her room. So I just got to yelling, "Get out my house, get my gun, go get my gun."
Another woman says a man believed to be the 13-year-old attacked her daughter on Northway about a week prior.
This young man, whoever it is, threatened her with a knife and some scissors and told her to take her clothes off.
And if she didn't, she was told he would kill her. Right now, police say they've recovered DNA and a knife, and they're working on a timeline. They believe his first break-in goes back to 2022. His alleged victim then, only 9. He would have been just 10 years old back then. And recently, police say the teenage suspect's behavior becoming more daring and violent.
It's a very scary thing for anybody, let alone a young girl, to be in their bedroom sleeping and have someone grab them.
Okay, I'm going to make the very unpopular statement that this kid should go to prison for the rest of his life. He's only 13? Yes, I know. And if he's capable of doing these things by the age of 13, what is he going to be capable of as an adult? Is the prison system going to make him into a better person? Why should even one more person be put at risk of becoming his next victim so that he can have a second chance after what he's done? Second chances are appropriate in some cases. They are inappropriate in other cases. And this is a case where a second chance is inappropriate. No father in the home, of course. And by the way, you are just as responsible for what your son did while you were not there as the mother is responsible for what he did while she has been there. Moving on to our next topic, there is always some new gender woo-woo to cover, even as it dies the death of 1,000 crazy screams.
But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense, patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the f*** out of their business. Like, and let them make that decision. That's their decision to make.
You may get claps from a liberal audience, but the polls show that the majority of people are completely against allowing a minor whose unformed brain cannot make permanent choices to make a choice that will result in them mutilating their body permanently, even if their parents have been pressured into allowing them to do this by dishonest doctors, asking them if they would rather have a dead child or a living trans child, like Chloe Cole's parents were pressured into allowing it, or just because they have a liberal circle of friends who cheer them on. We do not allow lobotomies anymore, even if the child wants it, even if their parents say, I'm good, stick a probe in there and scramble it around. We don't do that. You wouldn't support that in that instance. I doubt you would even support some religious extremist who wouldn't allow a blood transfusion to save their child's life on religious grounds to cause their child damage or to die. You would be fighting against that. So explain to me why this is different. You wouldn't be saying mind your own business in that case. We don't mind our own business when it comes to abuse. That was not the only virtue signaling that went on during Bill Maher's show.
I noticed that at the Super Bowl, there, for the first time in, I think, 4 years now, the Trump administration is making them take away end racism, which they had written in the end zone, right? And when
why? It just seems silly. I mean,
to do it or not to do it?
Why get rid of it?
Oh, I could tell you why.
I know, but it's just like
It was stupid to begin with.
Yeah, but
let me ask you, who's it for? And if you're a racist and you see end racism in the end zone, you're going to stop being a racist?
Correct. Empty, useless virtue signaling. If that message means anything to you, then you are already not being a racist. If it doesn't mean anything to you, and you are out there as a member of the Klan, you're not going to quit because the NFL told you to. We want tangible, real change, not leftist, performative, empty shells. Sense the room. Massachusetts, second largest city, voted to become a sanctuary city for trans people, which basically means nothing. They joined San Francisco, Sacramento, and Ithaca as trans sanctuary cities, and they celebrated that decision with a drag queen poetry reading. Whatever.
I need the city to protect me because the federal government won't. And if you think you're afraid of Trump, you should see how afraid of Trump I am.
This is someone in white paint and a bright blue clown wig.
You say that you're afraid of Trump,
and
that's
costume.
why you don't want the city to be a safe space for trans people. You better prepare for trans people to make this a very unsafe space.
I'm shaking right now. I don't want to be here.
Who made you come?
I'm sorry. Am I taking too long pleading for my life?
Who's threatening
you
your
remember
life?
how many children I have and that 2 of them are trans.
Statistically impossible.
Both the B and the T in the LGBT.
This is the guy who played the crazy person in Silence of the Lamb.
Syndrome, which is a connective tissue
We're back to the
disorder
clown.
that causes me immense physical pain. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I have narcolepsy, and
does
I
that have to
couldn't
do with
drive myself
transgenderism?
here, so I had to hide from my driver that I was in drag, which is not an easy thing to do.
You think he didn't notice?
I do not want to be here. It's my day off.
This is a woman with a beard
I do not want to be in your
in a
DMs.
tuxedo. And what is the point of listing off all your medical conditions? I have a hangnail and a pimple and an owie on my knee. And, I mean, like, what does that have to do with transgenderism or your city becoming a sanctuary city for trans people? Is this the same kind of narcissistic, delusional, am I taking too much time pleading for my life craziness that they were combating in Salem? Because that would probably force me to reevaluate my view of history. You people really need to test your water in Massachusetts for, everything. By the way, in the crowd, you can see in the video someone was holding up a sign at the council members that said, quote, "I see you. Silence equals death." That is the kind of threat that a completely unhinged person makes over a completely meaningless resolution that you want passed that changes nothing in your life.
Can you look at me and tell me how many of my friends need to die before you do anything?
Please wrap up.
Look at me!
Okay, we're all done here.
Which of your friends have died?
Pathetic.
We're all done. I speak as someone who is always misgendered.
This is the Silence of the Lambs guy again.
People refer to me as sir when I prefer to be referred to as ma'am.
Good for you.
I speak as someone who is afraid to use public toilets. I speak as someone who is a member of this community and is a queer person.
So, again, I repeat the question to the first guy. Who has died? Which transgender person has been executed by your city? And to the guy from Silence of the Lambs, if you think you're afraid of the toilets, you're the reason women are afraid to use public restrooms that are meant for women. The idea of encountering your massive, squirming, agitated, unhinged self who believes that things are going on that aren't. Yeah. They finished up by having the activist hand a script to a child, and then they used the child as a pawn to get him to read the following message.
Noticing people here are trying to control the rights of others, and that's not right. We should make Worcester a sanctuary city for trans people. Everybody deserves to feel safe, and everybody needs to feel safe. I've lived here for 4 years, and there hasn't really been any changes in how people feel safe in the city. My birthday is this Saturday, and all I want is peace and for you to vote yes. Please don't let me down for my birthday. There's a lot of queer people that I love, and to Candy Carlson, you should know to never call someone I'm 7 and I know better. The kids are watching and we're ready to vote you out.
Okay, first off, someone needs to inform the child that children don't vote. Second, manipulating children is par for the course for trans activists. That's not trans people, trans activists. So why should we allow ourselves to be impacted by what is visibly clear manipulation and treat it as though it isn't? The kid was referring to this story when he shamed the councilperson for referring to someone as it.
This morning, the first openly non-binary lawmaker in Massachusetts history taking a leave of absence from their post.
We're talking about Worcester City Councilor at Large, Thu Nguyen, says it's to focus on their mental health, saying they faced a discriminatory and toxic culture on the council.
Mr. Chairman, under your leadership, I have felt unsafe around this council body. I have faced transphobia with being misgendered and recently learned that I have been dehumanized to a point where I'm being referred to as it by my colleagues on this council.
Councilor Nguyen made those comments at a city council meeting Tuesday night. Nguyen also said they attend the council meetings via Zoom because they feel unsafe at City Hall.
I really, really wished I felt safe enough to show up on the council floor.
Okay, first of all, I would like to know exactly what you think is going to physically happen to you if you attend the meeting in person with the other city council members. Do you think they are armed and going to attack you? Is that what you expect me to believe? Number 2, if you are non-binary and you want others to use gender-neutral pronouns, it is all we've got. They is a plural noun. They is not a word you use to describe one person. The identity of being non-binary is your choice. You choose to reject your biological pronouns and demand that we stop using them. And then you claim to be so traumatized by getting what you demand from others that you're going on a free vacation at the taxpayer's expense, stealing the money that they pay you to go to work so that you can heal from a non-event. You know, children who try to use that excuse with their parents are sent to school the next day and told that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Grow up. And as for your city, go ahead. Drive all the sane people out. Businesses will quickly follow, and you can collapse into a hellhole where the asylum patients hold you all hostage. Your property values will drop, your lives will disintegrate, and that will all be your choice. It's no skin off my nose. Everybody's free to make their own choices. Go ahead. Now for our final story, Doge. Elizabeth Warren's CFPB has been gutted by its new acting director, who put a halt on all operations and cut off all funding as well. The new director, Vought, posted to X on Saturday night, quote, "Pursuant to the Consumer Financial Protection Act, I have notified the Federal Reserve that CFPB will not be taking its next draw of unappropriated funding because it is not reasonably necessary to carry out its duties. The Bureau's current balance of $711.6 billion is in fact excessive in the current fiscal environment. The spigot, long continuing to CFPB's unaccountability, is now being turned off. I have determined that no additional funds are necessary to carry out the authorities of the Bureau for fiscal year 2025. The Bureau's current funds are more than sufficient and are in fact excessive to carry out its authorities in the manner that is consistent with the public interest." Musk posted to X on Friday, "CFPB, rest in peace," with an emoji of a tombstone. Elizabeth Warren is predictably freaking out over the death of her agency.
If you have a bank account or a credit card or a mortgage or a student loan, this is code red. I am ringing the alarm bell. Elon Musk and the guy who wrote Project 2025, Russ Vogt, are trying to kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If they succeed, CEOs and Wall Street will once again be free to trick, trap, and cheat you. So why are these two guys trying to gut the CFPB? It's not rocket science. Trump campaigned on helping working people. But now that he's in charge, this is the payoff to the rich guys who invested in his campaign and who want to cheat families and not have anybody around to stop them. Yeah, it's another scam.
You set it up outside of our democracy, and you also refused requests for transparency. So now you don't get to cite a threat to democracy as the reason why it should be preserved. Not with the evidence of the way it's been used to abuse its powers and even to try to regulate AI. After hearing what Mark Andreessen had to say about your little tyrannical kingdom, I now say, let it burn. Maxine Waters, with over $1 million worth of corruption on her hands and conflicts of interest regarding her husband out the wazoo, thought that I would care what she had to say about this. Having her defend Elizabeth Warren's brainchild actually just serves as confirmation that this bureau is a cesspit.
Wow, wow, wow. Look at this crowd. Elon Musk, where are you? Bring your ass over here so you can see who's here.
Oh, Lord, they've escaped from the nursing home again.
We're not afraid of you. We know that you are the co-president now of the United States of America. He's a thief. He's a gangster. He brings his billionaire friends along with him because they think that they can take over this country. And Trump has said, you give me enough money, you can have it.
Ma'am, I said it's nap time at the retirement home. And Trump enriches his friends and family. Are you mistaking your own reflection for Trump? Do you even understand what credibility means? Squad member Ayanna Presley took her turn.
Last week I saw a sign in the crowd that said Doge stands for dangerous oligarchs grab at everything.
That's not clever. Try again.
I said it then and I'll say it again, that Elon Musk needs to keep his grubby hands, his greedy grubby hands off of our government.
It's not your government, sweetie. It's our government. We the people. You work for us, remember? And how is it greedy of him to spend less of my money? You're so corrupt that you don't even know up from down anymore, do you?
Every time you hear Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, you just remember, it is the Department of Government Evil.
I agree that there are departments in the government that are evil, which is why we're cutting them. Trump had this to say in reply.
Tremendous fraud, tremendous waste, and tremendous abuse, and theft, by the way. And the day you're not allowed to look for theft and fraud, etc., then we don't have much of a country. So no judge should frankly be allowed to make that kind of a decision. It's a disgrace.
MSNBC tried to argue back.
There is this sense in which Donald Trump is hearkening back to a period, right, where the United States imagined itself as an imperial kind of force, kind of informed by its democratic principles, an ironic and contradictory sort of position. And it's also the case, I want to say this, that there's always been this tension between America as an idea and America as blood and soil. Mm-hmm. This is the distinction between good nationalisms and bad nationalisms, right? We think we're driven by the Constitution, but there's been an idea underneath it that this country must be, and must always be a white nation. And that ideology has driven
Nobody
policy
thinks
decisions.
that. Wah, 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 wah. Somebody else is up.
If you look at other autocrats around the world throughout all of human history, including in recent years, when you look at, say, Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, or how Xi Jinping is eyeing Taiwan ever more closely as he ages a bit, there's this idea that a real legacy comes with more territory. That's not a new concept. It both helps you consolidate power at home. It stirs up nationalism. You got a bit of a sugar high. And it also is something that, you can associate yourself with going forward.
I'm sorry, but you're the dude who had the nickname in the White House of Hamas because you were so radically un-American. So, let me think really hard. Yeah, I'm not impressed. The Attorney General, Pam Bundy, had this to say.
I haven't seen Elon Musk tweet. He is a friend of mine. He is a great man. I think he's very frustrated with what's happening in our federal government. At USAID alone, they're giving out billions of dollars that should not be distributed. We're going to back him up. We work our whole lives in this country, and we all pay taxes in this country. And for people to find out that $2 million is going to Guatemala for sex changes is outrageous. And we're going to back up Elon Musk every way we can. That includes lawsuits against these people who are doing that, and we will be successful. We have so many unelected judges who are trying to control government spending, and there is a clear separation of powers. They're doing it to Elon Musk, who is a great man and a good friend at Doge. What they're doing to him is to our country is outrageous.
The New York Times, clearly hoping that manipulating feelings was still in season, wrote an article saying that we should all feel sorry for the people in the federal government who are being cut for their wasteful spending because they are stunned, sleepless, angry, and in tears, painting them as the voiceless victims. No, the victims would be all of us. And it's very unwise for the media to fail to recognize that, because that failure is causing them to defend the indefensible. And that is being duly noted. Right now, we all say to you in unison with J.D. Vance, I don't really care, Margaret. We don't owe them jobs forever, especially if they're not doing things that we want to continue paying them to do, and especially not if they are betraying us in exchange and stealing our money in order to fund a bunch of crap. Most people feel stressed and cry when they're fired. We all do when we're told that our positions are no longer required. Why should government employees be exempt from life, especially if they've committed wrongdoing?
I think this is the most serious constitutional crisis the country has faced, certainly since Watergate. The president is attempting to seize control of power and for corrupt purposes. The president
by
wants
the executive
to be
branch
able to
controlling the executive
how
branch.
Where money is spent so that he can reward his political friends, he can punish his political enemies. That is the evisceration of democracy. You stand that next to the wholesale endorsement of political violence with the pardons given to every single January 6 rioter, including the most violent who beat police officers over the head with baseball bats. And you can see what he's trying to do here. He is trying to crush his opposition by making them afraid of losing federal funding, by making them afraid of physical violence.
Yeah, we don't see it that way. We don't see him trying to stop all of the waste and the executive branch controlling the executive branch as a constitutional crisis. Good luck to you as you try to swim upstream. Go ahead. Drown your own credibility. Cry wolf. You've done it to us for so long that we're deaf to it now. Ilhan Omar tried this.
What we are witnessing is a constitutional crisis. We are seeing an executive branch that has decided that they are no longer going to abide by the Constitution in honoring Congress's role in the creation of the agencies, in their role in deciding where money is allocated. And so the only recourse we have, since our congressional leadership, the Speaker, will not stop the executive, is through the judiciary.
You know, the fact that this is her party's revered future leadership is exactly your problem. We despise her. Abuse of power in the executive branch. You mean like when Joe Biden tried to amend the Constitution on his last day in office via a tweet? Something that only the states can do by having 3/4 of them ratify the Constitution with an amendment? And people like you are still trying to argue that the presidential tweet is now constitutional law. Or how about when the executive branch under Joe Biden ignored the Supreme Court's ruling that student loan forgiveness was unconstitutional? Like that? Yeah, I don't think you care very much about the Constitution, Ilhan. Which means I don't care what you have to say about this or anything else. So scrounge up someone with some actual credibility and then try again. According to the New York Times, while they have failed to generate any public resistance or even an effective congressional resistance, more than 40 lawsuits have been filed by attorneys general, unions, and nonprofits in order to halt the blitzkrieg of cuts. Duly noted. Prepare to receive our response on Election Day of 2026 at the midterm elections. From now on, there are actually going to be consequences for failing to hear us, the people. You would do well to take that seriously. Local judges have also overstepped the limits on their power by putting local stays on complying with the executive orders to transfer biological men who identify as women out of female prisons and back into the men's prisons where they belong. And other federal orders are also not being complied with. Also duly noted. Supreme Court justices may be appointed, but local judges come up for elections. So, no, democracy isn't under assault. Democracy is alive and well, and we're going to gladly demonstrate that for you on each and every election that occurs. Democracy isn't under assault. The bureaucracy is. And it should be. Because those are not the same thing. And we aren't stupid enough to think that they are. What else you got? Oh yeah, our private information is going to be compromised by these non-bureaucrats who are now accessing it. The way that the bureaucrats that you're defending, the people you argue we're supposed to trust, accidentally leaked Trump's private IRS tax information to the New York Times. They don't seem very trustworthy. Next, our adversaries could get hold of classified information. You mean like when Hillary Clinton stored classified information on a private server and even the FBI said that she probably exposed it to foreign sources? Anything else? It's a constitutional crisis, I know. What is? The fact that the executive branch is cutting the executive branch? Okay then. Surely you can do better than that. Professional bureaucrats need to be the ones in charge so that there's trust in our systems. I'm looking around, and I don't see a whole lot of trust. Are you done now? Meanwhile, in real news, this is the kind of wasteful studies that we're funding scientists, in air quotes, at places like Notre Dame to do. This is what the experts are focused on.
LGBTQ plus students are more likely to leave STEM majors in favor of non-STEM majors by the end of their fourth year of college.
There are STEM-specific challenges here that we need to be understanding and addressing. We can't simply say that queer populations are underrepresented in STEM because they struggle broadly academically. Actually, no, they're crushing it academically. They're just being systematically funneled out of STEM and within STEM being mistreated. So hence the importance of the rest of the research that we'll be hearing from.
In D&I have two roles, and that one is to increase the engagement of SGM people, and so I'm meeting with them, talking to them, finding out what they need, what we need as communities. If it's pronouns, if someone's in a lab and being misgendered, or if someone's going through the gender affirmation process, I'm there. I'm the one that does that, right? I'm the one that does the safe zone trainings quarterly. I'm the one that does it if the IC is having an issue. I'm brought in to have these conversations, and I feel like that's one role that's really geared towards members of the community itself, but the other is to have these conversations that are very hard with people who are transphobic or homophobic, and I have to hear horrible things, and I'm trans myself.
Yes, I have eyes, and you wonder why we don't trust you or take you seriously anymore. Maybe because you theorize about people's feelings while forgetting that little thing that science is completely built on. Evidence? Oh yeah! Knew you skipped something. Just because there are not a lot of LGBTQ people in STEM does not mean they're being mistreated and funneled out. You would require evidence for a statement like that if you were actual scientists.
Oftentimes I get asked this question of, if you ask about these questions, aren't you creating division where there isn't any? This doesn't matter to science. Science is objective. And so why are we asking these questions? And the reality is that when we don't ask these questions, we live under the myths that these matters don't matter, and that actually science is such a pure meritocracy that we don't need to check and see are certain groups being equitably served.
It's important because, the data changed the conversation from just being opinion-based to evidence-based. And I agree with you. We shouldn't have to wait on the data. We know we got an issue. We should just be like Nike, just do it.
Exactly. Data and evidence isn't needed by science. When you know, you know. The official new motto of silence is, my feelings don't care about your facts. A report on the National Science Foundation shows that the Senate committee found 1 out of 10 grants awarded by the National Science Foundation between January of 2021 and April of 2024 had to do with oppression, social or environmental justice, gender, or race. And those really sound like science to me. And 27% of their grants went to DEI project. That number was 1% when Biden first entered office. And we just heard them say that when it comes to matters like these, you don't need any evidence. So what exactly did these so-called studies that you embezzled my money to conduct consist of? Struggle sessions where you talked about how you feel about these things and then charged me millions of dollars for doing so? Here's an example of some of these grants. In 2022, Columbia University received more than $4 million in exchange for studying ways that they could decolonize geoscience. A professor at Northwestern received a $1 million grant in 2023 for story work for racial equity in STEM with insights from Karl Marx. A professor at the University of Pittsburgh also got $1 million to argue that artificial intelligence should not be neutral because that, quote, only serves the capitalist, racist, heteronormative, patriarchy, etc. in society. Another study costing $500,000 determined the concept of peer reviews was racist, concluding, quote, the accepted values and practices in science can serve as roadblocks and barriers to the inclusion and advancement of minority scholars. There's about 3,000 grants like this funded by the NSF. Get 'em, Bobby. Additionally, Doge found that the National Institute of Health, otherwise known as the NIH, had a contract worth over $180 million for administrative expenses that didn't have anything to do with health care in any way, including a contract to build a Tony Fauci exhibit at the NIH Museum. You mean the guy responsible for the deaths of millions of people who funded illegal gain-of-function research that led to the pandemic? Yeah, I'm really concerned that he be remembered. Doge also found that of the $35 billion that the NIH spent on research last year, $9 billion of it went to, quote, indirect costs. Other institutions have been exposed for spending over 60% of their total grant funding on these so-called indirect costs, which makes no sense. If you get $1 million grant to research Alzheimer's, there is no way to legitimately spend $600,000 of it on administrative costs like office supplies and staplers. And the grift goes on. In response, the Trump administration is capping administrative costs for grants at a maximum of 15%, which is more than enough. Trump tried to pass the same legislation the first time he was in office, and Congress chose instead to protect the massive degree of fraudulent waste that was going on for several more years. And they are again trying to stop the efforts to rein in the excessive waste. I wonder why. Who benefits from not capping discretionary administrative costs at more than the very reasonable 15%? Does some of that go to kickbacks? And when it comes to the judges who are overstepping and trying to stop the needed changes, they are primarily judges on the district circuit who are pretending that they have the right to put out national freezes on everything from Doge's employee buyouts to the cuts at USAID to these research grants. MSNBC tried to warn us of how dangerous it is when the executive branch doesn't follow the dictates of the judicial branch. They weren't concerned when Joe Biden and the executive branch continued to try to force through relief of student loan debts last year after the Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional. The highest court in the land who actually does have nationwide authority, unlike these randos causing trouble right now.
History's lesson is, well, not a whole lot happens to a president or an administration who refuses to follow an order because we operate on this kind of trust that the president will do that. And while it's probably apocryphal that Jackson said he has his order, meaning the Supreme Court, let's see them enforce it, it's a scary quote if true because it's really an unspoken thing that the courts don't really have their own armies. They don't have a powerful arm to enforce their orders. They rely on the government working properly and not defying them. So it is a scary concept. Presidents may have that power. Maybe it's not so much that they have that power. It's just that no one can stop them from not following the court.
Trump gave this response.
If a judge does block one of your policies, part of your agenda, will you abide by that ruling? Will you comply?
Well, I always abide by the courts, and then I'll have to appeal it. But then what he's done is he slowed down the momentum. And it gives crooked people more time to cover up the books.
Meanwhile, J.D. Vance posted a controversial tweet that sent them all into a dither. It read, and I quote, "If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general on how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." End quote. So, not controversial, true. There are limits on every branch, including the judicial one. And it sounds like this time the White House is prepared to fight back. If a local judge behaves in a lawless manner exceeding his authority, then his rulings do not deserve the respect shown to valid law, and they should be ignored. You cannot allow an unelected judge to hold an entire nation hostage when people want this wastefulness stopped. I'm beginning to understand why the peasants got fed up with Marie Antoinette. I have to keep reminding myself, I am against violence. I am against violence. I am against violence. Okay, I'm better. There are checks and balances to all three branches of power. And anytime one of those branches crosses beyond its domain, we are not bound by that illegitimate, illegal attempt to seize power that they don't have. A judge could not just declare that the First Amendment was illegal, because that clearly would not be constitutional. A judge does have some power and the right to make rulings, but they have to stay within the judicial branch's domain. So once again, no one believes your repeated crying wolf when you say that J.D. Vance is trying to overthrow the judicial branch. That is not what he said. I can read, and I can comprehend, unfortunately for you. And if you think that we the people believe you, then explain to me why right now, in the middle of all of this, Donald Trump has the best approval ratings in his entire political career. I'll tell you why. Because my response is exactly how the majority of the public feels. We don't believe you. We aren't listening to you. You have cried wolf too many times to be taken seriously. You have gaslit us too many times for us to trust you. But keep confirming our opinion of you if you like. A judge that Biden appointed overstepped his authority and blocked Trump's halt on federal grant spending. A judge that Clinton appointed overstepped his authority and blocked Trump's buyout offer for federal workers and also blocked Trump's transfer of a man who identifies as a woman to be taken out of the women's prison and be put into the men's prison. A judge that Obama appointed overstepped his authority and blocked DOJ and the Secretary of the Treasury from accessing internal Treasury records. A judge that Biden appointed overstepped his authority and blocked Trump's cuts to billions of dollars of fraudulent spending and scientific grants that were stealing 60% of them for overhead costs, as we covered. A judge that Trump appointed during his first term overstepped his authority and blocked the suspension of USAID workers after the corrupt embezzlement-style spending that they were recently exposed for authorizing. A judge that Obama appointed overstepped his authority and ordered Trump to reinstate the head of a special counsel office. A judge that Reagan appointed overstepped his authority and blocked prison authorities from following Trump's executive order to transfer men who identify as trans out of women's prisons. Judges appointed by Reagan, Bush, and Biden overstepped their authority, blocking Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship, which they do have the right to challenge, but not those particular judges. Now, another lowly federal judge named John Bates agreed to a request from Doctors of America to issue a nationwide restraining order, which is beyond the limits of his jurisdiction, which is not nationwide, against the Department of Health and Human Services, the FDA, and the CDC in order to try to force them to restore deleted web pages and data relating to gender ideology that was removed in compliance with Trump's executive order. They are part of the executive branch. The executive branch told them to take the pages down, and this guy thinks he is the self-appointed arbiter of all website edits that go on in the country. These emergency restraining orders were meant to be a drastic last resort, used only in extreme cases, and yet these judges are throwing them out for literally every move that they personally disagree with, which was not their purpose and only serves to delegitimize their authority. Multiple presidents, including FDR, refused to abide by judges' rulings when they overstepped the limits on their power, and that were limits that were put in place by the checks and balances built into our system. So, if unelected judges in the judicial branch are going to abuse their limited power to this degree, then my position is to paraphrase Andrew Jackson and say, you've made your illegitimate ruling, now let's see you enforce them. You're playing with fire, because we are prepared to fight back. And the collateral damage to the system will be bad for everyone, no matter who wins. Stop doing this and walk away from winning at any cost, because you're going to find that the other side is prepared to use every illegitimate method that you throw at them back at you. And like I said, the damage to the system is going to be bad for everyone, no matter who wins that war. Latest polling from Gallup shows that 56% of Americans believe that a huge percentage of the government spending is in fact waste and abuse. 55% of Americans believe that the government is doing too much. Only 41% believe that the government needs to do more. The majority of Americans want the government to be made to become more efficient. 58% of them have a negative view of the government, and only 26% of them have a positive view. Out of 25 industries that were surveyed, the federal government came in 24th. The only industry that is less popular than they are is the pharmaceutical industry. All of this is according to the numbers that were gathered by Gallup in November, right after the election. So that would be before any of the recent wasteful mismanagement and corruption was exposed. So these numbers are probably much worse by now. A Pew Research poll from last spring shows that even then, 56% of adults agreed that the government is almost always wasteful and inefficient, and 58% of them were dissatisfied with the size and power of the federal government. Chuck Schumer tried to argue that unelected federal court judges have the right to overrule the elected president whenever they want to over personal disagreements about what editing should and shouldn't be allowed to happen on government websites, and that their unlawful ruling should still be treated as infallible.
Donald Trump is not free to bulldoze his way through the rule of law. Donald Trump is not free to bulldoze his way through the rule of law. He is an executive, not a monarch. He swore an oath faithfully to execute the duties of his office. And when the courts speak, Donald Trump must accept their judgments and honor the Constitution.
Judges aren't monarchs either. The Constitution doesn't say that a lowly federal judge can overrule the President of the United States and that he's at the mercy of their judgments no matter what. That's not in the Constitutions. There are checks and balances on every power, every branch. One district court judge seemed to respond to the pressure of public sentiment and lifted his ban on Trump's buyout offer to federal employees, admitting that his court lacked the jurisdiction to impose such a ban in the first place. Senator Chris Coons went on CNN to defend spending $20 million on a Sesame Street program for Iraq.
Is funding Sesame Street a judicious use of soft power?
Well, Michael, the way you put it is the way I hope folks considering your poll today will think about it. This isn't just funding a kids show for children, millions of children in countries like Iraq. It's a show that helps teach values, helps teach public health, helps prevent kids from dying from dysentery and disease, and helps push values like collaboration, peacefulness, cooperation in a society where the alternative is ISIS, extremism, and terrorism. And to your point, it's pennies on the dollar. The U.S. Department of Defense has an annual budget of about $850 billion. USAID was spending about $30 billion. It is a small proportion of our total federal spending, and as Joe and I would often say, it's not just soft power, it's smart power. Let me leave you with one other quote, Michael, if I could. Jim Mattis, who was a 4-star Marine Corps general and Trump's Secretary of Defense in his first term, in a hearing back then said, if you slash development and aid spending, then I'm going to need more bullets for our troops.
Okay, so you seriously expect me to believe that Sesame Street stops wars? If Saddam Hussein had grown up with Sesame Street, then he wouldn't have tortured his own people. That's your argument. If Osama bin Laden had grown up with Sesame Street, that would have overcome everything about his culture and the ideology that he was marinating in, and he wouldn't have killed thousands of people on 9/11. If the people who beheaded Daniel Pearlman had only grown up with Sesame Street, they would have stopped and asked themselves, what would Big Bird do? How stupid do you think I am? Your argument is basically that we can't cut the big entitlement programs because they're too important to cut, and we also can't cut the little entitlement programs because they're too little to count for anything. So basically, we just can't cut anything. Yeah, I don't think so. According to the Washington Post, on Tuesday, Trump signed an executive order calling on agencies to work with DOJ in a bid to cut their existing workforce and limit future hiring. Trump met with Elon and his adorable 4-year-old boy beforehand. Here is what Trump had to say about Elon's little boy, X.
X, are you okay? This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
Then he got down to business, talking about all of the waste that DOJ is uncovering.
Senator Rand Paul today said that DOJ cuts will ultimately need a vote in Congress. Do you agree with that? Is that the plan?
I really don't know. I know this. We're finding tremendous fraud and tremendous abuse. If I need a vote of Congress to find fraud and abuse, it's fine with me. I think we'll get the vote, although there'll be some people that wouldn't vote. And how could a judge want to hold us back from finding all of this fraud and finding all of this incompetence? Why would that happen? Why would even Congress want to do that? Now, Congress, if we do need a vote, I think we'd get a very easy vote because we have a track record now. We've already found billions of dollars of abuse, incompetence, and corruption.
Yep, the media's attempt to make Trump jealous and insecure concerning Elon have clearly failed to drive a wedge between them.
At a high level, what are the two ingredients that are really necessary in order to cut the budget deficit in half from $2 trillion to $1 trillion? And it's really two things: competence and caring. And if you add competence and caring, you'll cut the budget deficit in half. And I fully expect to be scrutinized and get a daily proctology exam, basically. You couldn't ask for a stronger mandate from the public. The public voted. We have a majority of the public voting for President Trump. We won the House. We won the Senate. The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that. That was on the campaign. The president spoke about that at every rally. The people voted for major government reform, and that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for. If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, or if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? if the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. And then we were told, this is actually, I think, a great anecdote, because we were told the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And I'm like, what do you mean a mine? Like, yeah, there's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. And you look at a picture of this mine. We'll post some pictures afterwards. And this mine looks like something out of the 50s because it was started in 1955. So it looks like it's like a time warp. And then the speed, the limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government.
People thought that was a mistake, but it's actually true. This is the kind of craziness that runs and regulates our inefficient government. They still run like it's 1925 instead of 2025. Iron Mountain is a document processing company which processes all federal employee retirements using paper by hand in an old limestone mine in Pennsylvania where more than 700 mine workers operate 230 feet underground as they process 10,000 applications per month, which are then stored in manila envelopes and cardboard boxes, which is why the retirement process takes several months. The Department of Government Efficiency objects to these prehistoric methods being allowed to hold the American people hostage and slow down the entire process. As regards conflicts of interest, since Musk continues to own several businesses, he had this to say.
What are the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that there is accountability and transparency?
Well, we actually are trying to be as transparent as possible. In fact, we post our actions to the Doge handle on X and to the Doge website. So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't think there's been, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization. The kind of things we're doing are, I think, very, very simple and basic.
Pete Hegseth, as the Secretary of Defense, is welcoming Doge's audit of the Defense Department.
We welcome Doge to the Pentagon, and I hope to welcome Elon to the Pentagon very soon, and his team, working in collaboration with us. There are waste, redundancies, and headcounts in headquarters that need to be addressed. There's just no doubt. Look at a lot of the climate programs that have been pursued at the Defense Department. The Defense Department is not in the business of climate change, solving the global thermostat.
Right.
We're in the business of deterring and winning wars. So things like that we want to look for to find efficiencies, and many others, the way we acquire weapon system, procurement. There's plenty of places where we want the keen eye of Doge, but we'll do it in coordination. We're not going to do things that are to the detriment of American operational or tactical capabilities.
And I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the Pentagon has failed the last 7 audits in a row that it has had. Later that evening, the White House fired the independent Inspector General for USAID, Paul Martin, who was appointed by Biden in 2023. The more ridiculous the reaction from the media grows, the more Elon trolls them. We're not laughing with you, we're laughing at you. And CNN just keeps falling for it.
Now, the disruptor-in-chief, Elon Musk, who apparently has adopted the alias, at least he changed his social media handle to Harry Balls, tweeted this morning, "Democracy in America is being destroyed by judicial coup. An activist judge is not a real judge."
MSNBC also couldn't help but fall for it.
Let me ask you this, because the Democrats are in the minority, so you have only so much leverage. Have you all essentially made it clear to Mike Johnson that until they allow you all to subpoena Big Balls and the normalized Indian hate guy, at least subpoena them or subpoena Elon Musk, No votes on the budget. No votes. No Democratic votes at all to keep the government open. That is leverage Democrats have, theoretically, right? Are you all prepared to use it?
Yes, shut down the entire government in order to subpoena big balls. See how popular that makes the Democrats. I'm begging you. Anderson Cooper is also very upset.
Some of the details that have come out, like the, $59 million spent on luxury hotels, it's actually not...
You're talking about the FEMA money that was used for migrants? FEMA money for migrants? That's okay now?
No, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying it's okay. Don't put words in my mouth.
So would you stop that? Would you stop that process?
Don't be...
Caitlin Collin also has her "The End is Near" sign ready.
We are 3 weeks into the second Trump presidency, 3 weeks, and tonight there are warnings that the U.S. is dangerously close to a constitutional crisis. Now, the first shoe on this dropped when a federal judge today said the White House is defying his order to unfreeze billions of dollars in federal aid, marking the first time that we've had a judge expressly accuse the Trump administration of ignoring a court ruling. And in a separate case today, federal employees here in Washington told a judge that the administration was defying another order by not reinstating workers who had been put on leave. Now, this all has prominent Democrats and many of the nation's top constitutional scholars declaring that the U.S. is on the brink of a reckoning.
Yeah, I think it's time for a reckoning. Yet she can't understand why the entire audience of the late night show that she went on laughed in her face when the host suggested that CNN's reporting is completely unbiased and fact-based. That all sounds about as evidence-based as the concept of the doomsday clock, where experts randomly set a scary amount of minutes that the world has left before mankind completely self-destructs based off of, well, nothing other than their personal politics and fear-mongering. Democrats continue to fall into the suicidal trap of trying to defend all of the waste in the government rather than just disassociating themselves from it and declaring themselves shocked and horrified. Mr. Hedler, who is on George Soros's payroll, had this to say in front of Congress.
Waste is different from fraud. Fraud is different from abuse, and abuse is different from both. When we talk about improper payments, they are a subset of those other three categories. But that doesn't tell us the whole picture either. Sometimes improper payments are a function of bad record keeping. Sometimes they are a function of outdated information technology systems. Sometimes they come about through human error, and sometimes they come about through negligence. There are a variety of reasons why improper payments happen. It just simply is not the case that improper payments are only a function of bad people doing bad things with bad intent.
I don't really care, Margaret. It's unacceptable whether there are bad intentions or not. I want it to stop whether there are bad intentions or not. And at this scale, it's pretty hard to believe that all of it is merely incompetence. But even if it is, that's all the more reason for you to be fired if you're that incompetent.
That should talk about widespread fraud and abuse.
Oh, yeah. Tremendous fraud. There's tremendous fraud, and it's hard to believe that you can have that kind of fraud. You're talking about, are you talking about what? Wait. Which are you talking? You're talking about with regard to all of the investigations that are going on about this stupidity. What we're going to do is tomorrow I'm having a news conference. I'm going to read to you some of the names that hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars have been given to. And if you tell me that we should be giving money to those things, those entities, I think you'll probably have to leave as a reporter because you're not very talented. When you look at the kind of money, billions and billions of dollars being thrown away illegally, and there's no chance. I mean, I say it in front of our Attorney General, there's no chance that there's not kickbacks or something going on. When you give millions and millions of dollars to somebody that stands to look at something for 15 minutes and walks away with millions of dollars, that money's coming back in some form. And that's only one form of corruption.
I have mentors in the Reagan administration who came in looking for these things, and those people were not technical. And so when they went to the bureaucracy and they asked questions, there's so many ways of obscuring and blocking and deterring. And so what Elon did is he got root access, and he went to the tech systems themselves. No one has done this ever. Like, no president ever has had tech people around him. And they went to the systems, and they started finding things like, oh my goodness. And these people who work for the agencies try to confront them and say, no, you can't look at the systems. You're getting around all of our ability to block all this stuff. We thought you'd never actually get to see any of this. And they're freaking out because they're looking. So it's very transparent. They went to the systems. They actually saw the payments, and the payments were going out to crazy.
This is the head of the EPA.
Shockingly, roughly $20 billion of your tax dollars were parked at an outside financial institution by the Biden EPA. This scheme was the first of its kind in EPA history, and it was purposefully designed to obligate all of the money in a rush job with reduced oversight. EPA needs to reassume responsibility for all of these funds. We will review every penny that has gone out the door. I will be referring this matter to the Inspector General's office, and will work with the Justice Department as well.
It is going to be duly noted who are the people cooperating and who are the people acting like they have something to hide. This is the New York representative.
You look at some of the expenditures by USAID. For instance, I uncovered over $3 million to a rap artist in Gaza producing anti-Israel, anti-Semitic songs. Is that the best use of American taxpayer dollars? I would venture not. And so one of the things that we're going to do in this hearing tomorrow, obviously, is go through what actually is the role of USAID, what should they be focused on, and frankly, what have they been focused on?
This is the VA secretary.
There's a one that's going around in the media right now about veterans' benefits being cut. I'm the Secretary of VA. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not happening. They can do hypotheticals all they want. I'm telling you about reality. Reality is veterans' benefits aren't getting cut. In fact, we're actually giving and improving services in our Veteran Benefits Administration. They're actually clearing cases quicker. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay, so to the suicidal politicians out there who are prepared to die on the hill of making the waste continue so that you can keep sponging off the hardworking people of the United States, I can only quote to you the philosophers known as the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. And with that, I thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, please like and follow, because that's what helps make these things successful. And I hope you come back next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.